The Western world has always wanted Africa to follow its democratic standards and way of life. European colonizers also did the same without respecting the local cultural, social, and political life in African countries. They spread their culture and made African values look inferior. The same has happened until now when leaders in African countries have been forced to follow democracy, a system created by the West. Without going into the debate of whether democracy is good or not, one thing should be known. Ideologies cannot be exported as the West wants. Instead of allowing African countries to develop their own political systems, the Western countries finance corrupt leaders in Africa, make them win elections, and secure Western interests. But Guinea has shown that when an African country listens to its citizens and serves them, it can become a model state in the modern world. Even if a military junta governs Guinea, today it's one of the most developed countries in Africa with a new form of democracy. So, how has Guinea given all the political power to its citizens? Let's know about that in this video. The Republic of Guinea in West Africa recently became the center of attention after its military leader did something stunning. In the Western world, state resources are used for the luxury of the leaders and presidents, traveling in private jets and living in 5- and 7-star hotels. But this type of treatment is never given to the ordinary citizens. However, things are different in Guinea, as in this country, people hold real power. Yes, even though the Western world has portrayed Guinea as a country ruled by the military, in reality, this military is running the country more democratically than the Western leaders. Amidst reports detailing xenophobic attacks on Black Africans in Tunisia, Guinea took swift action by dispatching private jets to evacuate its nationals from the increasingly volatile North African nation. The attacks, reportedly aimed at immigrants in general, but particularly those from sub-Saharan Africa, were triggered by comments attributed to the country's president, Kais Saied, who accused immigrants of plotting to change his country's racial identity. Last week, President Saied denounced undocumented sub-Saharan African immigrants, asserting that their influx into the country was part of a plot to alter the country's demographic makeup. He also accused immigrants of being behind rising crime in Tunisia and instructed Tunisian security forces to take urgent measures to halt it. Rights groups, including those based in Tunisia itself, condemned the comment, labeling it as racist. The African Union also issued a statement condemning it, causing fears among immigrants in the country about the potential for attacks on them. The military government in Guinea took no chances on the safety of its citizens. It dispatched a government delegation headed by the Minister of Foreign Affairs, African Integration, and Guineans abroad, Dr. Morissanda Kouyaté, to Tunis to bring back all Guineans who were willing to return home. On their arrival, proper arrangements for their homes and jobs were made so they could live the best life in Guinea. The AU Commission summoned the Tunisian ambassador accredited to the bloc over the issue for an urgent explanation. In a statement, the bloc described the comment as shocking, noting that it went against the spirit of the Continental Union's founding principle, to which Tunisia belongs. It also called on Tunisia to honor its obligations under international laws to treat migrants with dignity. You should know Tunisia is one of 3 major transit points for migrants and refugees seeking to cross over to Europe through the Mediterranean Sea. The other countries are Morocco and Libya. One estimate, from a survey by the National Institute of Statistics of Tunisia, put the number of migrants living in the country at 21,500 as of 2021. The majority of these, according to NGOs, entered legally to study or work. Figures from the UN Refugee Agency indicate that there were about 9,000 refugees and asylum seekers in the country as of December 2022. According to UN data, the majority of these come mainly from countries like Eritrea, Sudan, and Somalia. But there are also indigenous Black Tunisians, who are estimated to constitute about 15% of the country's 12 million populations. Many of them are descendants of former slaves. Most of the migrants are from Black Africa, many of whom end up making a home in the transit countries, where they live in inhumane conditions. According to campaigners, the government is using the migrant issue to distract attention from the political crisis in the country. Tunisia has been in a political crisis since 2021. after the president was accused by his critics of staging a coup when he shut down parliament and assumed most of its powers. It is a racist approach, just like the campaigns in Europe. The presidential campaign aims to create an imaginary enemy for Tunisians to distract them from their basic problems. Ramadan Ben Amour, spokesperson for the Tunisian Forum for Economic and Social Rights, said in a statement. But the response of Guinea toward its citizens proved that this country exists to serve its citizens and nothing else. This dynamic change in Guinea is due to the coup we saw earlier in Guinea in 2021. On September 5, 2021, President Alpha Condé of Guinea was seized by the country's armed forces in a coup d'etat after gunfire erupted in the capital, Conakry. Special Forces Commander Mamadi Doumbouya delivered a broadcast on state television, announcing the dissolution of the constitution and government. After several decades of authoritarian rule in Guinea, Condé, the country's inaugural democratically elected leader, utilized its abundant natural resources to stimulate the economy during his tenure. However, the majority of the population did not experience economic improvements. In 2020, Condé modified the constitution via referendum to secure a third term, a contentious move that triggered the 2019-2020 Guinean protests. In his final term, Condé cracked down on protests and opposition candidates, resulting in some fatalities in prison. The government grappled with managing escalating prices of essential commodities. In August 2021, Guinea implemented tax hikes, reduced spending on the police and the military, and augmented funding for the office of the President and National Assembly in an effort to balance the budget. In response to this, the coup unfolded on the morning of September 5th, when the Republic of Guinea armed forces surrounded Sékou Touré Presidential Palace and cordoned off the broader government district. Following a clash with pro-government forces, the mutineers, led by Doumbouya, seized Condé, dissolved the government and its institutions, invalidated the constitution, and sealed the borders. On October 1, 2021, Mamadi Doumbouya was sworn in as the interim president. He vowed to take Guinea out of the crises that no earlier leader tried. From the country's independence from France in 1958 until 2010, Guinea endured autocratic regimes, including decades of corrupt rule. In 2008, a military coup ensued shortly after the death of Lansana Conté. The military relinquished power in 2010. Alpha Condé, the initial president peacefully and democratically elected in 2010, governed the country until his re-election in 2015. Despite a two-term presidential limit, the 2020 constitutional referendum extended term lengths, enabling Condé to reset his term limit and pursue 2 additional terms. The constitutional amendment triggered extensive protests, harshly suppressed with over 30 casualties between October 2019 and March 2020. Following the amendment's approval, Condé secured a third term in the 2020 presidential election, sparking protests over alleged ballot stuffing. Protests persisted, resulting in at least 12 civilian deaths. France distanced itself from Condé after the 2020 election, while China, Egypt, Russia, and Turkey continued their support. This unfolded as other West African and Central African countries witnessed democratic setbacks, including military takeovers in Chad and Mali, alongside Ivory Coast electing a president for a third term amid controversy and fraud allegations. Subsequent to the presidential election, opposition politicians challenging Condé's legitimacy encountered repression. For instance, Mamadi Condé was arrested in January 2021, and opposition leader Roger Bamba and Mamadou Ouri Barry succumbed in prison. Prisons in Guinea, as per Human Rights Watch, maintained extremely poor conditions. During Condé's tenure, there were significant improvements in infrastructure to extract Guinea's abundant mineral resources, particularly bauxite. The government entered into several multi-billion-dollar projects with Chinese firms to tap into new bauxite reserves and establish an alumina refinery. Guinea, holding roughly a quarter of the world's bauxite deposits, witnessed an uptick in the extraction of diamonds, iron ore, and gold ore. Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. Sadly, prosperity never reached the grassroots level to the public. That's when the people feared that the president was safeguarding his interests and the interest of private companies and foreign powers. In 2019, the government extended a credit facility with the International Monetary Fund, committing to running a fiscal surplus, increasing tax collection as a percentage of GDP, and reducing subsidies for petrol and electricity. Following recommendations at the United Nations Third International Conference on Financing for Development in Addis Ababa in October 2019, Condé pledged that 15% of mining revenue would be allocated to the National Agency for the Financing of Local Communities to support local government. However, this initiative did not benefit the majority of citizens, as 60% of the labor force still worked in agriculture, and communities around the mines felt inadequately compensated for land, water, and health losses associated with mineral extraction. But this is being changed by Mamadi Doumbouya, the man behind the coup. He was born on March 4, 1980, in the Konkan region of Guinea. He is of Mandinka origins and had a notable military career, including service as a French legionnaire and leadership of the Guinean Special Forces Group. His military career involved deployments to various countries. After assuming the role of President of Guinea, he vowed to literally change the shape of the country that has a long history. Guinea, officially the Republic of Guinea, is a coastal nation situated in West Africa. It shares its borders with the Atlantic Ocean to the west, Guinea-Bissau to the northwest, Senegal to the north, Mali to the northeast, Côte d'Ivoire to the southeast, and Sierra Leone and Liberia to the south. Commonly referred to as Guinea-Conakry, named after its capital Conakry, it is distinguished from other regions in the area, such as Guinea-Bissau and Equatorial Guinea. Guinea has a population of 13.5 million people and covers an area of 245,157 square kilometers. Formerly recognized as French Guinea, the nation gained independence in 1958. After enduring decades of authoritarian rule, it conducted its first democratic election in 2010. Approximately 90% of the population in Guinea is Muslim. Geographically, the country is divided into 4 regions: Maritime Guinea on the Atlantic coast, the Fouta Djallon or Middle Guinea highlands, the Upper Guinea savanna region in the northeast, and the Guinea Forestière region of tropical forests. French is the official language used in schools, government administration, and the media. Additionally, more than 24 indigenous languages are spoken, with Susu, Pular, and Maninka being the largest, dominating different regions. Guinea's economy relies heavily on agriculture and mineral production. It stands as the world's second-largest producer of bauxite and possesses deposits of diamonds and gold. The land that constitutes present-day Guinea was either bordered by or situated within historic African empires before the French arrived in the 1890s, claiming the territory as part of colonial French West Africa. Guinea declared independence from France on October 2, 1958. From independence until the presidential election of 2010, Guinea was governed by multiple autocratic rulers. Guinea, previously recognized as French Guinea, stood as a French colony until it achieved independence on October 2, 1958. The journey toward autonomy was shaped by the leadership of Ahmed Sékou Touré, a pivotal figure in the anti-colonial movement. Upon gaining independence, France extended an invitation to its colonies to join the French community, a novel association implying close ties with France. However, Sékou Touré and the Guinean leadership opted for full sovereignty and absolute independence, rejecting this proposition. A crucial aspect of Guinea's independence lay in its refusal of the CFA franc, a currency introduced by France for its African colonies. The CFA franc was linked to the French treasury, entailing economic and monetary connections to France. Guinea's leadership, aspiring for genuine economic and political autonomy, made the choice to abstain from adopting the CFA franc. In pursuit of financial self-reliance, Guinea made the strategic decision to introduce its own currency, the Guinean franc, in 1959. This action marked a departure from the economic influence of its former colonial power, granting Guinea control over its monetary policies. Now, the military leader of Guinea has vowed to change the shape of the country. Guinea's military leader, Mamadi Doumbouya, addressed the UN General Assembly, arguing that the Western democratic model is not suitable for Africa citing a recent surge in coups as evidence. Despite strong condemnation from the United Nations and Western powers like the US and France, urging the swift restoration of democracy, Doumbouya criticized their response as racist and condescending. Speaking to leaders in New York, he asserted, "Africa is grappling with a governance model imposed upon it. A model that suits the West, but is challenging to adapt to our realities, customs, and environment." Expressing frustration, Doumbouya called for an end to lectures and condescension, insisting that Africans are mature enough to create their own governance models. Doumbouya dismissed Western concerns about coups in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, where military governments have distanced themselves from their former colonial ruler and strengthened ties with Russia. He argued against forcing African countries into ideological battles from the Cold War era, emphasizing that Africans are not aligned with any specific power but are simply pro-African. Denouncing the practice of categorizing African nations and compelling them to take sides, Doumbouya deemed it an insult and racism toward a continent of over 1.3 billion people. He highlighted that his rise to power involved overthrowing Guinea's then 84-year-old president Alpha Condé, who had amended the constitution to seek a third term, sparking widespread protests. Doumbouya accused those staying in power indefinitely as the true conspirators, avoiding condemnation while plotting to perpetuate their rule. The leader of Guinea's military junta, Mamadi Doumbouya, outlined a plan to transition back to civilian rule, stating that the process would take 39 months. He described the proposed timeline as the median proposal, reached through consultations at all levels. This announcement faced resistance from the economic community of West African states, which had set an April 25 deadline for Guinea to present an acceptable transition timetable to civilian rule. But the Guinea leader did not care because he was ruling the country at the will of the people. His citizens love him and want him to rule, and that's the mandate a democratic leader needs. It's not necessary that elections are carried out to please the West, because elections solely do not mean legitimacy. From the time of assuming power to now, Colonel Mamadi Doumbouya has changed the shape of the country. Guinea has become an economic hub, and development is at full pace. People are prospering because there is proper rule of law and justice. What's more, to avoid officials from establishing relations with foreign governments independently, Mamadi announced travel restrictions for Guinean government officials. He conveyed to Condé's ministers, including the Prime Minister and top government officials, that foreign travel was prohibited until further notice, and they were required to return their official vehicles. In a speech the day after his forces declared on national television that they had detained the president and dissolved the country's constitution, Army Colonel Mamadi Doumbouya promised a government of national union. He also assured that there would be no witch hunt of the government officials he dismissed during the takeover, replacing them with regional military commanders. Doumbouya aimed to address concerns about economic disruption, vowing that Guinea would uphold all its undertakings and mining agreements, emphasizing its commitment to give favorable treatment to foreign investment in the country. Guinea's military leader, Colonel Mamadi Doumbouya, delivered a message to the UN, urging the West to refrain from lecturing Africa. During his address to the UN General Assembly, Doumbouya defended the use of military intervention in politics, citing a series of recent coups on the African continent. He expressed that Africa is grappling with a governance model imposed on it, one that may be effective for the West, but struggles to adapt to African realities. In a departure from his usual military uniform, Doumbouya, adorned in traditional African attire, rejected the notion that he is a typical coup leader seeking to undermine democracy. He asserted that true putschists are those manipulating constitutional texts to cling to power, indirectly referencing situations in various countries. Explaining his actions in Guinea, Doumbouya stated that he intervened to prevent the country from descending into complete chaos. The coup occurred amid months of protests against former President Alpha Condé's constitutional changes and bid for a third term. Doumbouya called for a break with the old world order, encouraging both the young and old in Africa to assert their rights and reject paternalistic attitudes. He emphasized that it is time for Africa to reclaim its place and urged an end to condescension and lectures from the international community. It seems that Madami is achieving all his promises and changing the shape of Guinea. In 2022, the estimated real GDP growth reached 4.8%, showcasing an uptick from the 4.4% recorded in 2021, primarily driven by the mining sector. This sustained growth highlights the country's resilience in the face of socio-political shocks, the repercussions of the COVID-19 pandemic, and Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Inflation experienced a decline in 2022, with the appreciation of the Guinean franc partially counteracting imported inflation. The budget deficit narrowed to an estimated 1.3% of GDP in 2022, down from 1.7% in 2021, with improved performance. Public debt reduced to 35.5% of GDP in 2022, a decrease from 40.4% in 2021. While the risk of external over-indebtedness is moderate, the fiscal capacity to absorb shocks remains robust. The deficit has been financed by foreign direct investment in mining, loans, and project funding grants. Mamadi Doumbouya's approach in Guinea introduces a compelling dynamic in the political transformation. His ascent to the interim presidency, marked by a military coup in 2021, has sparked debates about the trajectory of democracy in the country. Initially, Doumbouya's decision to assume the role of president could be seen as an attempt to swiftly address the political instability and governance challenges that Guinea was facing. Now he has the unwritten mandate of the people of his country who are prospering. Doumbouya has implemented policies and strategies that are directly benefiting the public, unlike former policies that only safeguarded elites' interests. He knows that achieving sustainable economic development requires a comprehensive approach, including structural reforms, investment promotion, and social development initiatives. What do you think? Should other military leaders in African countries follow Guinea? Isn't it true that these military leaders are legitimate because people love and want them, and that's what democracy is? Let us know your thoughts on how the West would use its plot and tactics to fail Guinea. Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If yes, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.